Right, thank you. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming here on this nice spring day. Let me see, I'll be basically reading an essay that I wrote for Counterpunch website a few months ago, which is based on a talk. It's an expanded version of a talk I gave actually last year at the Bughouse Square debates at the Newberry Library. So anyway, and I'll be sort of adding things, as I go through it to update it, but the essay that I wrote lays out the basic situation, I think, and Charlotte can comment afterwards. She has her own presentation ready, and she can talk about the nitty-gritty of the lawsuit taking place. One thing that's happened recently is, of course, the terrible fire at Notre Dame Cathedral. I remember I was talking to Robert Hughes on the phone when he told me that, yeah, by the way, Notre Dame is burning down. And it's just kind of interesting. It's strangely enough there, if you had a chance to look at this poster of what the proposed presidential center will look like, it's essentially almost exactly the same height as Notre Dame. But whereas Notre Dame is a very sublime work of art, built over 100 years, an organic expression of the community, this is essentially, as far as I can tell, although I'll be interested in what other people have to say about the presidential center, a work almost exclusively of conspicuous consumption. If you look at the design, it doesn't really express, anything that Notre Dame does, in terms of spiritual reverence or anything like that. It expresses bigness, it expresses power, it expresses ego, and it creates a certain sense of, I would say, anyone looking at it might be awed, but not in a positive way. I think it's much more about resentment and envy, actually, which is the emotional force of capitalism, actually. So I would say that what Obama is doing here is creating a cathedral of capitalism, and that's really what's going on, because there are many questions as to really what its purpose is, and why he's doing this, and what it's going to contain, which I argue is essentially nothing at all. So anyway, I will from there I'll just go into my presentation, and then we'll segue to Charlotte. In Chicago, a low but persistent rumbling is heard these days, especially on the south side. It is Frederick Law Olmsted, America's greatest landscape architect, and the planner of what would become the city's Jackson Park, turning in his grave and muttering Victorian imprecations against Barack Obama and his eponymous foundation. Why? Before we get to that, let's see what Olmsted wrote back in 1871, which, as everyone here knows, is the year of the Great Chicago Fire. At that time, Hyde Park, Woodlawn, South Shore, and other southern lakefront precincts, what would now be classified as inner-city neighborhoods, were still remote, barely settled suburbs of a fast-growing city. And this is Olmsted. There's but one object of scenery near Chicago of special grandeur or sublimity, and that, the lake, can be made by artificial means no more grand or sublime, by no practical elevation of artificial hills, that is to say, would the impression of the observer at overlooking it be made more profound. The lake may indeed be accepted as fully compensating for the absence of sublime or picturesque elevations of land. There are three elements of scenery, however, which must be regarded as indispensable to a fine park to be formed on your site. The first being turf, the second foliage, the third still water. For each of these you are bound, at the outset, to make the best of your opportunities, because if you do not, posterity will be likely to lay waste to what you have done in order to prepare something better. Prophetic words. The Obama Foundation, together with city government and the University of Chicago, is now indeed laying waste to one of Olmsted's major urban landscaping accomplishments, and not in order to replace it with something better. If Obama, the U of C, and City Hall have their way, a large chunk, 2 square blocks to be exact, of Jackson Park, one of the jewels of Chicago's 19th century park and boulevard system, will be repurposed, denuded, and rendered unrecognizable. If the deal goes through as planned, the private and unaccountable Obama Foundation will be allowed to lease 19.3 acres of prime lakefront land forever, not forever, 99 years actually, for the grand total of $1. This stolen public space will house the Obama Non-Library, formerly dubbed the Obama Presidential Center. The centerpiece of the Obama Presidential Center, hereafter referred to as the Great Tower of Nothing, is a 235-foot high structure that's 50 feet taller than Rockefeller Chapel, the reigning monument to money and ego in Hyde Park, that is as cold and ugly as avarice itself. Although originally marketed as a presidential archive, the huge and handsomely endowed OPC will house no papers or artifacts of the Obama administration, and for reasons not fully elucidated, will have no connection to the National Archives and Records Administration. The actual presidential papers will be stored, at least temporarily, in an abandoned furniture store in a distant and uninviting suburb of Chicago, which will apparently not be open to the public. It's in Hoffman Estates, by the way. The bunker-like edifice, towering over a newly enlarged golf course, will instead serve the Obama Foundation as, quote, an ongoing project where we will shape together what it means to be a good citizen in the 21st century. It is abundantly clear that in the age of Trump, useful citizenship training will center on the theory and practice of civil disobedience and mass resistance. But this is not the sort of ongoing project the Obama Foundation seems to have in mind. There is talk about, quote, cultivating the next generation of leaders, which suggests a long-term goal of using corporate largesse to churn out more triangulating Wall Street Democrats in the Clinton-Obama mold. To skeptics, it is not readily apparent how this content-free non-library, really just a big clubhouse sheltering the vaguely purposed foundation and fundraising apparatus of an ex-president who rarely speaks out on public issues, will secure our rights and liberties in an age of encroaching fascism. Aware perhaps of the project's political and historical irrelevance, the Obama Foundation insists that the Great Tower of Nothing will bring new life and energy to a comatose neighborhood. The OPC will, quote, be a new landmark for the South Side and an economic engine for the city of Chicago, drawing hundreds of thousands of visitors every year, creating thousands of jobs, and will help to continue the revitalization of historic Jackson Park. These claims are typical pie-in-the-sky developer talk. Yes, the Obama Unlibrary may well turn out to be an engine of development, but not in a way that will benefit the 99%. Quite the contrary, as we will see. And as for redeveloping Jackson Park, no matter how they describe it, they're taking away parkland, says the redoubtable Herb Kaplan, whose tiny Protect Our Parks group, of which Charlotte is a member, is suing to stop construction of the project, charging that it's an institutional bait and switch designed to privatize the commons. This sets a terrible precedent for Chicago's public lakefront, which by a city mandate going way back to 1836 is pledged to, quote, remain forever open, clear, and free of any buildings or other obstruction whatever. So what is the underlying purpose of this overscaled, oddly empty complex, which may end up costing as much as $1.5 billion to build and endow, all to convert a rare spot of green in an underparked city into yet another heavily trafficked, highly paved, tightly controlled space? I think it's pretty clear if you look at the players, history, and trends. It's all about gentrification, i.e. ethnic cleansing, which is already taking place in Chicago at a pace never before seen. I contend that the plutocrat-funded Obama Foundation and Presidential Center plays the same role in the long-term transformation of the city's southern lakefront that the Obama presidency did in American politics, that of putting a faux progressive smiley face on the ugly underlying realities of institutionalized inequality, capitalist skullduggery, and white privilege. As others have noted, this white elephant on the lake is actually a Trojan horse, using understandable but misplaced racial pride and identity politics and a fuzzy do-gooder mission statement to mask a real estate scheme that is all about neighborhood flipping and displacement of the poor. A little historical context helps clarify things. In 1980, when Harold Washington was contemplating his historic mayoral run, Chicago's black population peaked at nearly 1.2 million. The Urban Institute estimates that by the year 2030, that number will drop to 665,000, an astonishing 45% decline over 50 years. According to journalist and researcher Alden Lurie, the restrictive covenants, redlining, and white-flighted yesterday have been replaced by stiff resistance to affordable housing, high-cost housing that effectively prices out some people of color, and disinvestment in communities of color regardless of their economic heft. The result is that the 20th century's great migration of African Americans from the South to Chicago has become the 21st century's great exodus away from Chicago, a shift in direction driven by the same virulent, undying racism. The University of Chicago, which engineered the Jackson Park non-library bid, is the institutional driving force of the Great Tower of Nothing. The university, which used federal urban renewal, or as James Baldwin liked to say, Negro removal funds, to boot thousands of mostly minority families out of Hyde Park and nearby Kenwood during the 1960s. No doubt, the U of C no doubt sees the Jackson Park complex as an outpost of its own campus, projecting its identity southward and creating a larger buffer zone for its intensively policed, bubble-like neighborhood. It also serves to reinforce the university's deep and marketable connection to the Obamas. Barack taught at the law school, Michelle had an executive position at the medical school, and to the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party they personify. But there is more at stake here. Since the Obama Presidential Center was launched, the U of C has announced its intention of building a 1,200-bed student housing complex nearby, as well as a boutique hotel. These ventures would be an unthinkable risk for the cautious institution, were it not for the billionaire-funded and city-subsidized boondoggle anchoring the site. It's all about property values, tax revenues, and desirable demographics. Rahm Emanuel, Barack Obama's one-time chief of staff, and the outgoing mayor of Chicago, of course, speaks no other language. But what does Obama, Rahm's old boss and staunch friend, say about all this? At a community meeting this past winter, Obama commented, "We've got such a long way to go in terms of economic development before you're even going to start seeing the prospect of significant gentrification. Malia's kids might have to worry about that." If you can get past the dripping condescension of that remark, you encounter its Trump-like disingenuousness. Gentrification has long since begun oozing south of the Midway, the wide boulevard that once formed the university's southern border. Woodlawn, south of Hyde Park, was declared the third hottest neighborhood in the nation for the first half of 2017, with median housing values rising 18% in that time, according to the City Lab website. If it wished to, the Obama Foundation could make a strong statement regarding the evils of gentrification and displacement, but that's not what the foundation is all about. What it is about is raising money, great gobs of cash, principally by tapping the obscenely rich. In 2017, the Obama Foundation solicited no less than $232.6 million. Million-dollar donations have come from such checkered sources as financier Ken Griffin, Illinois' richest man, who also gave $20 million to the campaign of Bruce Rauner, as well as Goldman Sachs, Bill Gates, and George Lucas, whose own attempt to blot the lakefront with a monument to self only recently went down to defeat, as I hope this one does too. Why the super wealthy are so eager to contribute to a paper-free library, an artifact-free museum, in a part of Chicago they are unlikely to visit is a question that invites speculation. One possible answer is that Obama is redeeming his chits from 8 years of meritorious service to the ruling class, including his unstinting, if ultimately unsuccessful, devotion to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, an arrangement that would have transferred huge amounts of what was once quaintly known as national sovereignty to our transnational corporate overlords. It was just about the only piece of legislation that Obama was willing to get on the mat and fight for. No wonder he's expecting and receiving concrete manifestations of gratitude, especially from the tycoons who went unindicted and fully bonused up after the 2008 meltdown, winding up bigger and stronger and more arrogant than ever. What we do know is what the oligarchs paying the bills don't want or like. This includes attacks on the economic and political forces of gentrification, which they view as progress, or advocacy for affordable housing, or acknowledgement of systemic inequality and injustice, or demands for radical change on behalf of, among others, the many poor and disenfranchised people on the South Side. This fundamental class bias, this need to be, as the professional fundraisers say, donor-friendly, explains the most puzzling gaffe so far by the Obama Foundation: its failure to negotiate a community benefits agreement with local organizations, which would increase consultation with neighbors and ensure that at least some needs are met and some fears are allayed. This is one of the project's multiple ironies, that Barack Obama, the one-time Southside community organizer, is now thwarting a Southside community from empowering itself and taking part in decisions that will affect it for generations. No longer needing the community's votes, Obama plays the paternal benefactor, giving the neighborhood what he and his rich friends and expert staff know it really needs, and who cares what the non-degreed riffraff think. If billionaires want to throw their money away on a gold-plated cultural non-asset, like the Obama Presidential Center, who am I to say nay? It is, after all, a free country, especially for those who own it. But let the fat cats put the non-library where, if it can't do actual good, it will at least do less harm. There are hundreds and thousands of empty lots on the south and west sides of Chicago, places where construction of any kind would be a plus, bringing some measure of hope and attention to depleted and forgotten neighborhoods. Jackson Park is literally the worst possible location for job creation, despite the foundation's claims. There can be no spin-off construction on what technically remains public parkland, no next-door retail or restaurants or residences. Yes, there will be some jobs attached, but they will be classic examples of what author David Graeber terms bullshit jobs, PR and legal and security and administrative sinecures that are at best unnecessary and at worst pernicious and or absurd, e.g. well-paid fundraisers raising funds to hire more fundraisers to raise more funds ad infinitum. The Obama Foundation and other establishment-blessed philanthropies of its type are expressly designed to manufacture a certain kind of liberal bullshit. By turning stark social and economic conflicts into fundable, non-threatening programming, they lubricate the squeaky gears of the social order rather than confronting its stubborn contradictions. The astronomical salaries paid to Obama Foundation leadership. In 2017, the executive director and CEO earned a combined $1.48 million, suggest that the organization is unlikely to pit itself against the capitalist inequities that shred the social fabric and are the bottom line in the South Side's racialized poverty equation. I earlier described the Obama Foundation's Jackson Park follies as a Trojan horse, but perhaps Potemkin Village is the better metaphor. The proposed complex is a spectacle that symbolizes community life and culture and memory and scholarship and public purpose without actually containing anything of historical value. Just as the Obama administration symbolized progressive politics and racial advancement, concealing its chronic and self-neutering passivity, dead centrist philosophy, and unquestioned allegiance to the powers that be behind a facade of faux populist rhetoric and wispy good intentions. Chicago doesn't need this hollow monument to gentrification, elitism, and privatization on its lakefront. We as a nation don't need more crumbs from the tables of the billionaires who choke and starve us, or more tainted foundation dollars turning angry activists into tamed social entrepreneurs. What we do need is tough, radical grassroots democracy, which is to say the community itself, and not self-appointed champions with their own agenda, taking on the strategic neglect and cancerous disinvestment that constitutes slow-motion ethnic cleansing. In the unlikely event that Barack Obama really wants to make life better for all on the south side of Chicago, he will need to come down from his skyscraping glass and concrete fortress and join those on the ground, listening to what they say. If Obama could do that, which at this point he cannot, he might come to the sobering conclusion that his world is not their world, his friends are not their friends, and his hopes and dreams, as embodied in his fraudulent and destructive non-library, are built on their despair. Thank you. No, I want you to transfer it.
Transfer it. Unclip it.
I just put that.
Just leave it on your table.
Yeah, okay. I don't know, can you clip that to your screen?
Yeah.
I'm very technically challenged.
Move your microphone closer to you.
Pardon?
Move the microphone closer to your face.
I just said I was technically challenged.
All right.
There you go.
Okay, well, I will read also, unfortunately. Is this on?
Yeah, just pull it towards you closer.
Oh,
There
okay.
you go.
Well, I want to give you, I come from another perspective, and one of the perspectives I'm coming from is being disparaged, let's say, and, well, maybe just leave it at disparaged by people who violently are in favor of having the Obama Center in Jackson Park. Now, I personally have no problem with the Obama Center. It can be anywhere that the Obamas and the Obama Foundation wanted to be, except in a public park. And so one of the things I might be able to share with you is a letter that has been recently published in the Hyde Park Herald, which is the one newspaper in Chicago that actually publishes letters to the editor, by the way. If you've maybe not seen letters to the editor from me, although occasionally one gets published, that's not because I don't write them. I do write them, but the papers don't publish them. And the reason for that is that their editorial policies are in favor of the Obama Center in Jackson Park and only in Jackson Park. And so they don't want to publish any letters from people who disagree with that policy. So the Hyde Park Herald is like the only place that basically, the only publisher, let's say, that will publish my letters. So when I wrote one, there was a response, and then, anyway, it's kind of interesting. But before I get to that, I'd just like to tell you why I filed this lawsuit. I went to the University of Chicago College and Law School. I graduated from law school in 1962, which is a long time ago, obviously. And I practice law, and I'm a retired lawyer. And so one of the things that offended me when the when the University of Chicago wanted to give away land belonging to the Park District of Chicago. They wanted to give it away to a private foundation who happened to be incorporated in Washington, D.C. Not that that really makes any difference. It's just kind of an irony. And they didn't own that property, and I found that to be quite offensive, but particularly because I happened to have gone to that university and I thought I was proud of that university. So I wrote a letter, as I am wont to do, to the University of Chicago magazine, objecting to having the University of Chicago giving away its property it doesn't own to a private institution, and they didn't publish it. So then finally I emailed and they didn't respond, and then I called the editor up and I asked her, you know, what's going on with my letter to the editor, and she told me they're not going to publish it. So I mean, okay, so then I wrote my letters as usual to, let's say, the Sun-Times and the Tribune, and well, of course they didn't publish them. So we have a situation here where I don't know how many people favor having the Obama non-library in Jackson Park, or how many people don't, but we'll never know, because not even the University of Chicago magazine would publish my letter, let alone the Sun-Times or the Tribune. So really the voices of those who object to this are just simply not heard. They're not being published by publications that I think have a duty to publish the views of people who are connected, either live here or went to the University of Chicago or whatever, even if they disagree with their policy. So that's a big obstacle. So then, finally, in 2018, I think it was January or so, about 200 faculty from the University of Chicago published a public open letter, which some of you may have seen, stating their opposition to the Obama Center in Jackson Park. And of course, the key is in Jackson Park. Everybody is perfectly happy to have an Obama Center in Chicago. The question is, where should it be built? And the faculty, this particular group of faculty, wrote this letter setting out a lot of good reasons why it should not be in Jackson Park. One reason being it's a public park, and other reasons, they pointed out some of the things that Hugh mentioned, that it's not located in a place that makes it convenient to any kind of development. I mean, there's no room there for shops and restaurants and all these different amenities that supposedly are going to attract all these tourists there. So it's kind of an isolated area that isn't really going to do the job that the Obama Foundation wants it to do, and it's certainly not going to, let's say, attract the neighborhood people. And proof of this, you might say, is the fact that they're building a 450-car garage. And that is the only access that is really available there for people to get there. As Hugh told me a few minutes ago, the green line, I believe it was, that used to be there has been demolished. So I guess unless people take up the ancient art of walking over there, they're simply, or maybe a bicycle, they're simply going to have to drive there and park in the 450-car garage. Now, what does that do? Well, I happen to be an environmentalist. I may not look like one. I don't know what they look like, but I am. And one of the things that the professors and other faculty members objected to about the whole thing of an Obama complex of buildings in Jackson Park was the fact that it's automobile focused. And that is not only not good for having involvement of the community and so forth, it's always also very bad for the environment, because that means 450 cars are going to, even though it's underground, this is supposed to make it perfectly wonderful, even though it's underground, they're going to be driving in and out, producing exhaust and CO2, which will pollute the area and, of course, increase global climate change. So, let's see now. After I read the letter to the, by the professors and other faculty members from the University of Chicago, I was really impressed, because these are people who are somewhat beholden to the University of Chicago for their livelihood. They work for the University of Chicago. So I thought it was pretty daring of them to issue this letter. So then here I am, I'm a retired lawyer. I'm not going to file a lawsuit myself anymore, but I decided that was the only way to achieve my goal of stopping the Obama Foundation from building anything in a public park, namely Jackson Park. I mean, I could write all the letters in the world and nobody was going to publish them. I could go stand with a billboard, I suppose, in front of Jackson Park, and people would come and take my picture, and I'd be noted as being, some kind of a crazy person. But the fact is, I have no way of influencing anything except for the one thing, which is filing a lawsuit. And that is the only way that the Obama Foundation will possibly be stopped from building something in Jackson Park, except for one other thing, which nobody seems to notice, even though it's the elephant in the room. There are a whole bunch of federal investigations going on, because Jackson Park is a what? A landmark, thank you. I occasionally can't remember words, and so Hugh has kindly supplied that word. In 1972, I believe, it obtained landmark status. And so the federal government is interested in it, and they are conducting a whole group of investigations into it, whether it's going to impair the environment and so forth. We have no idea what the outcome of those investigations is going to be. And it may be that they will decide, that the federal government will decide that the Jackson Park cannot have anything built in it by the Obama Foundation. But nobody seems to be aware of that, because people take a very hostile view toward me, and I'll get to some of the others, for stopping this wonderful event, which would be to chop down about 300 trees, which compose a grove of mature historic trees in Jackson Park, which are located in the 19.3 acres that have been designated as where the Obama Center is going to be built. And of course, in addition to that, they're also going to be chopping down hundreds of other trees to make room for the facilities that currently are in the 19.3 acres, like the baseball diamond or whatever it is. And in fact, when I say they being the Park District of Chicago, in concert with the Obama Foundation, has already chopped down 40 trees to create a new baseball diamond to replace the one that hasn't been destroyed, and there's no way will even be destroyed until the federal investigations are completed, and who knows when that's going to be. But they went in and did it without going to asking the judge in the case that I filed, excuse me, for permission. So they managed to chop down about 40 trees before finally it was noticed by the general public, and articles started getting written about it, and the lawyers that we hired went to court and asked the judge to stop it, which the judge didn't actually do, but they got the message and they stopped destroying this woodland. Now, when I first decided that I wanted to file a lawsuit, I asked my husband, he's a retired public defender, and whether he objected. I mean, only fair to include him in this decision, and he said, no, I don't care. And so then I called Herb Kaplan, who is a friend of mine. He's also went to the University of Chicago Law School and college, and we both, because of going to that school, happened to live in Hyde Park for several years, and, we're friends from ancient days, going back to when we were once young. And I asked him if he would want to file this lawsuit with me. And he said, yeah, he would. So then we went to find a lawyer, and that was very interesting because we couldn't even make appointments with lawyers because when they heard the word Obama, they immediately disintegrated into not being interested at all. And of course, my friends, who I love and very dearly and all, were terrified of speaking above a whisper about the topic of, possibly challenging the Obamas on anything. It's truly an amazing thing. It's a true cult of personality, and no one is, and everyone sincerely seems to be afraid of voicing any kind of negative feelings about Obama. So we found a law firm that was willing to take it, and strangely enough, it's Roth Fioretti, and Mr. Fioretti ran for mayor. You may have noticed he did not do real well, but nonetheless, he had the inside track, I suppose, of knowing about Chicago politics. I really don't know. But anyway, they filed the case, and Mayor Emanuel came out and declared that this was a frivolous lawsuit. But nonetheless, after finally there was a hearing on the defendant's motions to dismiss, the judge did not find it frivolous. The judge did not dismiss the case. So the lawyers, so here we are with our very small little law firm representing us, and I look at us as David and Goliath because we are David, and Goliath is the city of Chicago with its, I think they have 450, they have hundreds of lawyers. I mean, they're not all working on this case, but they have a very large staff of lawyers, and then of course the Park District has its own legal staff, and these private law firms, politically connected, very powerful private law firms are also working on the case. So, here we are, but then the Logan Foundation, I don't know if any of you read about that, came in, donated $100,000 to help this case be pursued. Now, Herb Kaplan is the president of this organization called Protect Our Parks. It is not Friends of the Park. Friends of the Parks is the organization that wouldn't go into court on this case because they were, I don't know why, they had their reasons. Protect Our Parks is a very tiny little...
But they sympathize, I think, Friends of the Park, no? Or are they fellow travelers?
That
No?
kind of sympathy doesn't get you very far. Protect Our Parks is a small corporation, as I said, not-for-profit. And we made Protect Our Parks the lead plaintiff because it's much more imposing to have an organization, you know, Protect Our Parks is certainly more imposing than Charlotte Adelman, let us say. So that's what the case now is known as, is the Protect Our Parks POP lawsuit. So let me see, I had some things written down. I want to make sure oh yeah, well what is the basis of our lawsuit? Well, my basis was, purely emotional. I mean, I just cannot stand the idea of chopping down entire groves of trees in public parks, I mean, that is just absolutely offensive to me and intolerable, But, that's not good enough because you can't go into federal court and tell the judge, I oppose chopping down these trees. And he'll say, that's very nice, call the next case, So you had to have some legal reasons for it, and there are some very good legal reasons, including the fact that the various laws were changed, ex post facto, you might say. You're a lawyer, aren't you, out there in the yellow blue shirt? No, behind you. You're not a lawyer? I thought I recognized.
He is a professor at the University of Chicago.
Oh, what is your, I won't go into that. You look so familiar, I thought you were a lawyer, I apologize. So anyway, the grounds for this case are having to do with the laws that were changed to accommodate the new facts. The laws before the issue came up of building in the public park apparently the city of Chicago and Mayor Emanuel did not feel allowed this building in a public park because he arranged to have the city council pass laws that permitted the transfer of this property. The Park District Code was changed to enable transfer of the Park District property to the city so that they could transfer it to the Obama Foundation. The law, let's see, the museum, I think it's a museum law now. A state law, I think it's a museum law, was passed unanimously to add presidential libraries to the number of things that could be built on and so forth. And I mean, all these laws were passed at the instructions, I would dare say, of Mayor Emanuel to enable there to be an Obama Center in a public park. And as has been noted here, one of the big issues is the so-called bait and switch, which is that when the Obama Foundation was created in January 2014, the idea was to raise the $1 billion that they claim will be spent on this project, to raise a lot of money to enable there to be a presidential library. And the word library is really a word of art because it isn't meant to be a library like the branch library, Chicago branch library that may be there. It was meant in terms of under the National Archives law to fulfill the requirements of the federal law. And then lo and behold, in May 2017,
It was 2016.
no, it was 2017 that 2017, what I'm talking about is that's okay. When the Obama Foundation, they never really came out and told anybody. It kind of was, they announced they had a new design, a new architectural plan, but then it sort of was slipped in somehow that they no longer were going to be building a presidential library. They were now building essentially a private presidential whatever, it could have been called complex. It could be any name, because there's nothing about the word center that has any meaning. It's just a term that they chose instead of the library, which they could not use, they could no longer use because it's governed by federal law. And what there's now going to be is governed by no law. It's just a situation where all the, as has been mentioned here, all of the contents of the Obama administration, which belong to the federal government and not to the Obamas, will be boxed up and kept in federal depositories, wherever that might be. Now, Mr. Obama has the distinction of being the first black president in the United States. He now has the distinction of being the first president to opt out of the National Archives situation and not have a presidential library. So from my perspective, although my whole idea was basically based in environmental issues, that's how I look at it, I still think it's really a very sad commentary that black children who will be trying to visit presidential libraries, and they will go to the Clinton Presidential Library and the Bush Presidential Library, but then when it comes to the Obama Presidential Library, suddenly there'll be this big gap, which I think of as a missing front tooth, and there won't be a presidential library. And these children who are going to want to buy a $5 presidential library passport that they can get stamped at all the different presidential libraries will not be able to buy one at the Obama Center because it's not going to be a presidential library, and they're not going to, the Obama Center won't be able to stamp their presidential library passports for that same reason. So anyway, probably way past the amount of time I'm supposed to ramble on, so I will stop, and of course I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you.
Am I on? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you were much too kind. Where do I start here? You know, when I think about the Obamas, and I'm just reflecting back, and I'm not directly posing a question with regards to this, the idea of the building of this monstrosity, this tower of nothingness. But Obama became president in the period of time when we had this monstrous financial meltdown. And I believe, and I'm a little fuzzy on my numbers here, but I don't think I'm far from being wrong as far as my numbers. Somewhere around 9 to 10 million American households lost through foreclosure their homes. A huge chunk of that were black Americans. This is on this man's watch. What did he do to prevent that catastrophe that occurred? Oh, and I might add too, parenthetically, that every time I hear him or his wife, and they don't speak that much in public, but when they do, they seem to be scolding black America. If you think about it, I mean, it's just crazy. But getting back to this point, I just find this really disturbing that this guy is building this monument to himself, and he's got this thing on his hands, like I say, that resulted in probably upwards of 20-25% of black America's homes being lost. He could have done something. He had the power, right? President of the United States. I mean, we're talking about the federal government had money. They had legislative tools that they could have employed, and he allowed that to happen. So getting to your point about this depopulation of, in Chicago, which I don't think is all that unique, although it may be an example of one of the more glaring depopulation situations where the black population is being, I think what accounts for a lot of this is they're being forced out of their homes. And the usual mechanism that the powers that be utilize to make that happen is through, of course, property taxes. You know, when you can no longer pay your property taxes, what happens? You know, you gotta get out, right? And this is happening all over America. And this has not ended as far as that goes to this very day. People talk about recovery. I mean, what kind of recovery is this? I don't see it. But in any event, I just wanted to kind of drill down into that, get your thoughts about, you know, the politics surrounding this. And I want to just leave with one other idea about this too. I mean, I think this money that's being, I mean, this is kind of, and you made mention of this indirectly, this is kind of like the payoff for the work that he did for Wall Street. Because we're talking about what, $1 billion or more dollars? You know, as far as local taxes go, I mean, just chopping down all those trees we're talking about here, there's a cost associated with that the taxpayers in this town, although that's like probably next to nothing, but still significant enough that the burden is going to be on us. So anyway, if you want to just open
Yeah,
up the
can
idea.
I answer? Yeah, that's true. Obviously, the emphasis was on saving the banks, not saving the homes. There's no doubt about that. I think Charlotte probably knows more than I do about this, but my own sense is that on the south side, you know, they really are committed to creating the Obama Library. You know, he is a hero, and this is going to be a focal point for pride. On the other hand, there were votes in various in 2 wards in Chicago on the south side near where the Obama Presidential Center will be in February, and it was a non-binding resolution, but was basically should there be a community benefits agreement for the library, and it passed 90%. And I have a picture here from the Sun-Times of an activist with a sign saying, "Obama yes, displacement no." So you know, it's not quite as, you know, it's not a completely, you know, uniform belief there. I think there is real apprehension about the possibility of gentrification and flipping and displacement there. And you know, if you look at what the like what the 606 Trail, the Bloomingdale Trail did, you know, this great river of gentrification that goes through the northwest side, property values started doubling, tripling, quadrupling immediately. And I think that is exactly the plan, that is exactly the hope of the people who are actually behind this. And I think part of the problem is, you know, making this argument to the people who are actually affected. So, yeah, I don't know if Charlotte, did you have anything to add maybe about what can be done?
Oh, yes, well, what can be done? Well, just to add to comment on the feeling about how people feel who live around there, I don't know how the University of Chicago faculty member who's here today, maybe he has more insight into that than I do. Pardon?
It's just who's talking.
Oh, but I know that there are a lot of people who live, or at least there are some people who live in that area who don't agree that it's a good thing to have the Obama Center built in Hyde Park. But they're not going to say it publicly. And the reason I know that is that when we filed this lawsuit, we also have a website, you know, the Protect Our Parks website, and it has a place for people to send in comments. And there are a lot of comments that come in. Well, some of them tell me I should commit suicide. I mean, so there's been some very hostile comments that were sent in to me, really nasty, nasty comments. One I was so alarmed at that I went and called the local police, who told me that it's nothing, you should see what really goes on, you know, so I was reassured. But other people send in comments saying, we love to walk in that particular part of the Jackson Park. That young lady there is nodding her head. Maybe she can speak a little later about this. You know, and then these letters that are sent to the Hyde Park Herald about how horrible the plaintiffs, it's me, are, and how horrible the Logan Foundation is to give any money to a horrible cause like opposing the Obama Foundation's building in Jackson Park, and how sleazy, that's one of the words that the letter writers used, how sleazy everyone is who's associated with this. One of the things is that this kind of public shaming, you might say, this is going on in Hyde Park. I mean, I don't live in Hyde Park anymore. I did live there when I was going to school. But just from the comments that come in on this website, people are saying they do use the park. These letter writers claim that no one uses the park, that the plaintiffs don't live in Hyde Park, so they have no right to say anything about what goes on in Hyde Park. Well, that's a very provincial viewpoint. I mean, if we're getting down to that, I guess each of us can say exactly what's going to happen to every park as long as we live right next door to it. But the judge found that we had standing to file this lawsuit because we're residents of the state of Illinois and we're taxpayers, and that gives me standing to have a voice just as much as anybody who lives right next door to the park in Hyde Park. And they don't live there, they haven't been deeded the land in perpetuity either. They may move, they may just have moved there. I mean, it's all like very possessive attitude. Only we can say what's going to go on in the land that we happen to live there just out of pure chance. And next week we may not even live there. But so, you know, as a resident of the state of Illinois, I feel that I have just as much a voice in whether they're going to destroy the trees in Hyde Park as anybody else. But that's what's going on in Hyde Park. A lot of people are afraid to say anything, and we've asked some people we knew if they'd be plaintiffs. No, they wouldn't be, even though they oppose having the Obama Center in Jackson Park, because they can't face being vilified by the stronger voices that are willing to be very nasty about how they treat these people. That's just a fact. It's not something I can prove. It's not something that is written anywhere that one can say this is, you know, written here, so it's therefore true. But nonetheless, being afraid to speak out and have a viewpoint that's not popular is definitely a factor in what's going on with the public opinion situation of what's going on about building in Jackson Park.
Hugh and Charlotte, I wanted to thank both of you for your presentation. Since none of us in this room are really the poorest of society, each of us is to some degree or another an environmental disaster. So maybe, you know, the idea of you committing suicide along with the rest of us is possibly an environmental and carbon positive thing that we can do. But I try to consume as little as possible. It's not easy. But beside that, I want to speak up for a somewhat bourgeois viewpoint, which is, if I remember my history correctly, Daniel Burnham had a plan for the lakeshore of Chicago. And that plan was that it was going to be parked from one border down to the other border. All along the lake, there was going to be no private land. And part of it, I'd actually like to, now that I think about it, I'd like to drill down on how the, because part of this, there's actually some law that you can't build up on park land, because Hugh began his paper and his speech with a quote from Olmsted. But at one time, this was law, that you couldn't build structures that blocked the view of the lake if you built them on park land. And I'd actually like to know how that land, this is just beside the point, between Loyola and Hollywood Boulevard, ended up going from mansions to high-rises that block off the lakes, particularly since the state owns the right-of-way of the first 15 feet, first 15 yards, something of the beach land, the first 15 yards of land from the water's edge. But that's beside the point. My point is, this is an ugly fucking center. And it's a tall piece of garbage. that is going to block people's view of the lake from a bunch of different angles and a bunch of different, a rather long sight line, and it should be against the law. And you made mention of these SOPs in terms of these laws that were passed afterwards, these exceptions. I believe this is just plain wrong, because I like to look at the lake, and other people should too, and it shouldn't be blocked by this piece of garbage structure that's ugly. Everything else aside, it's unaesthetic, and it's also unaesthetic to put up something that's going to block our view. So that's what I've got to say. Thanks for your presentation.
I would say that I agree with you. I happen to actually, I know it's horrendous to say, but I happen to actually like the design. I know I'm in a minority of one, but what I like is actually irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether I like it or not. And the very fact, you have strong feelings, that's why a lawsuit is what was required. There are people who have equally strong feelings, just the opposite of what you expressed. So that's why you have to go to court and let a court decide as to what the law is. And of course there's also these federal investigations that are also, are very decisive. There's no quarreling with them, whatever they may turn out to be. But let's just say the judge rules, it says it's perfectly legal to build in Jackson Park. Well, that's it. I won't agree, but I'm not going, there's nothing, hopefully now we'll be able to appeal the case and so forth, but eventually it's going to be up to a judge to decide. Now, what you were talking about is really the public trust doctrine, and that is a kind of a confusing area right now because there were amicus briefs filed in this case by dueling law professors on each side, and one set of law professors feels that under the public trust doctrine, the plaintiffs do not have a case, and the other side feels that under the public trust doctrine, the plaintiffs do have a case, and it's going to be up to the judge to make that determination. I agree with you that public parks should be free from any building, especially by private institutions and so forth, and it certainly sets, if it's permitted, it sets a horrible precedent for the future. There'll be, all kinds of buildings by all these other luminaries who want their 20 acres or whatever, but it's going to be up to a judge to decide on the law.
Yeah, there's no stopping this once. If this happens, the dike is going to break. I think the protection of the lakefront, it's always been, this is Chicago, things like that happen, and you can have all kinds of beautiful aspirations, but private property tends to win. I don't know, but I think this is a fight for the soul of Chicago. I think the lakefront is, without question, it is our greatest asset, and to throw it away for a tourist attraction shows a real lack of mentality.
Just to mention something, I don't know if you know, I'll be done soon, I hope. When President Obama was a community organizer, he went to the Friends of the Park and asked them if they could help him get more parkland for his South Side constituency. It's just a little fact. Yeah, it's in their materials, it's on the web, and of course now that he's not president, and when he was president, of course, he was interested in trying to challenge global climate change, but now that he's a private citizen, he wants to chop down hundreds and hundreds of trees that serve as a natural carbon sink, absorbing and sequestering CO2 and serving as a natural carbon sink, and to pave it over with buildings that will not permit the carbon to be absorbed in the future. And instead of a woodland that's been, absorbed, and oh, by the way, the woodland, when it's chopped down, it will release CO2 into the atmosphere, thereby exacerbating global climate change even more. The whole thing is very strange for a president who was very angry when the climate change agreements were not continued, but when he has a chance to express his own view as a private citizen, he is not that much in favor of helping challenge global climate change. So that's just a little fact. Why don't you go ahead?
Can you say if they're creating a TIP district there, tax increment financing, or is the property going to get any TIP financing? And also, is there anything being done to organize against this thing, or can there be anything to organize against this thing?
Oh, you know, that, I don't know about the TIF, maybe you know.
I don't think there's a TIF involvement.
But I do should say that one of the things, you know, we have a new mayor-elect in Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, and she has asked for the public to make comments about things they would like to see her do during her administration. And because she went to the University of Chicago Law School, so as I did, although when I went there, it was a whole different story as far as how women were treated at that time, but that's another story. But because of that, I wrote her a letter, which I asked the University of Chicago Law School to send to her, and I told her why I would ask her to, now that she'll be mayor, to disavow the plans that were done by Mayor Emanuel and not have the Obama Foundation Center in Jackson Park. And I also pointed out to her the financial realities, which she's very familiar with, of Chicago, simply do not allow Chicago to be able to afford this. I look at it as like letting the king build his castle and let all the people who live in the area around him be hungry and not have clothes. I mean, Chicago doesn't have the money to pay for its policemen that in the future. There was an article in the Sun-Times that laid it all out. Hugh has it here. I mean, Chicago cannot pay for this. And where are they going to get the money? Well, it's going to be taxes of the people, and Illinois residents who had no voice in this at all are going to be paying for this as well. So I think that's my answer to that comment that was just made, your comment, not regarding TIF, because I don't know about that.
Are there government funds that are going directly to the project?
Well, here's what's going on,
Hundreds of
yeah.
millions.
Millions of dollars, I guess maybe we should have made this more clear. Millions of dollars are, first of all, Chicago is borrowing millions of dollars from the state of Illinois, which, you know, somebody's got to provide that money. Not for the Obama building itself, the complex of buildings, 4 buildings, including a tower that's going to be between 15 and 20 stories high in a migrating bird flyway, whereby the birds are now going to be crashing into a concrete barrier that was a free open space to fly through for thousands and thousands of years. But there has to be, they're planning, the Obama Foundation has demanded that they reroute all these streets and reroute traffic patterns. And that's all going to be, millions of dollars are going to be spent on that, and that's all being paid for by the taxpayers of Illinois and the city of Chicago. And that's one reason, by the way, there's a federal investigation, because Lakeshore Drive is a federal highway. And that's part of their federal investigation.
And one of the things that's going on is they're trying to create this tremendously huge golf course, combining the Jackson Park Golf Course with the South Shore Country Club one. And one of the changes that they're going to make is, what I understand, is to eliminate Cornell Drive, which is a very important thoroughfare there. And so there will be horrific traffic implications for this plan. Yeah.
Yeah, the money, I mean, the cost is on the taxpayers. You know, Mr. Obama may be very generous in that he's going to pay for, with all the donations, creating the actual building, but he's requiring everything be changed all around it to accommodate the needs of that structure, those structures, I should say. And we're going to all pay for it, whether we like it or not, and no one voted on it. It's not the kind of a thing that required a vote. but nonetheless, no one did vote on it.
I too retired from law, and I'm very reluctant to rely on the judiciary to come to a reasonable decision on something like this, because my great-grandfather was John Marshall, the second Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he approached President Adams with a proposal. There was some question about whether the popular vote could take away some of the privileges of the landowners of the time. And he assured President Adams that if he were appointed to the Supreme Court, he would make sure that any law that was contrary to or not in the interests of the landowners at the time, he would declare unconstitutional, which he did. 44 perfectly valid laws were declared unconstitutional by my ancestor. But I'm concerned about something else. If this presidential fiasco gets gets underway, can you imagine what Donald Trump is going to be?
That's a great question.
I mean, other people have raised, if other luminaries, if Donald Trump will do it, he won't do it in Chicago. But as one letter to the editor of the Hyde Park Herald pointed out, what if, for example, Hillary Clinton decides she wants to build a cultural foundation for women in Jackson Park? Or if, what's his name, Robin Williams, if he decides, if his heirs decide they want to build a foundation for the performing arts in Jackson Park. I mean, the point is that this is a precedent, which is a very, if this is built, a private thing like this is built in a public park, this is a very bad precedent, because it'll become buildings with park in between as opposed to a park. But I should have finished up on telling you what you could do about it. If you really feel strongly about not having the Obama Presidential Center in Jackson Park, you can write to Lori Lightfoot. She does, I wrote her 2 letters. I sent one, as I said, to the university, but the other one I sent to her campaign headquarters. I don't know if there's any better address or not. And you can also write letters to the editors of the Chicago newspapers, because if they start getting enough letters, maybe they'll start publishing some of them. And I mean, those are the ways that I can think of for people to make their voices at least attempt to be heard.
Yeah, just in terms of the Trump Library, I can't imagine it ever coming into being, because I can't imagine him ever entering a library.
No books, right.
Well, Hugh, it's not a library.
Oh, right, not library, sorry.
L-I-E.
Hugh and Charlotte, thank you so much for your presentation today and your work on preventing this atrocity on the South Side. I live in Hyde Park. I'm a local Hyde Parker. I've been there since 2006, and I would be devastated if this was built there, because I do use that park quite a bit all the time, and I'm also a lawyer and I'm an animal rights activist, so I do not want this monstrosity built in my neighborhood. And this is just to me, this is just a continuation. Remember when Obama wanted to have the Olympics in Washington Park, and the people were like, no, you can't, and it was not approved. But he did want, and that would have been another environmental disaster also in Hyde Park. And I really don't understand why he and his legacy of community activism is not building it in on Garfield Street, so in all of those vacant lots. Build it there. Why are you taking away the people's land? I mean, as you know, that community is very diverse, both racially, economically, and this is where we go this is where we go. We go to the park. I'm there every day. I'm at the point, and this is just unbelievable, and I want to do whatever I can to stop it. And I also wanted to ask you whether you've sent letters to the Chicago Reader, because I'm on their board. So I'm gonna make sure, if you sent it, that somebody hears about having it printed, as well as in these times. Have you sent letters to those publications?
The Indie Times?
In these times.
In these
I'm not
times.
familiar with that.
Yeah, that's a left-leaning newspaper, and also, I think we should try the Sun-Times again. I also know some people there.
Really? Well, that's interesting, because, first of all, thank you for what you just said. You should write a letter to the Hyde Park Herald. I mean, there's this whole chain of letters now where they're, you know, I have one here right now. I mean, I just happened to read it as I was waiting around, and they say that, well, they say that there's no woodland habitat on the proposed 3.5-acre site on which the actual physical 4 buildings, including the 20-story tower, will be built, which is so misleading because we know that the other 16 acres have woodlands on them, because that's the reason they have to cut down 300 trees within that specific small area. So, I mean, they're trying to present this, these letter writers, I can show you, I can give you the letter, are trying to present it as if I was, in my letter, I was lying about the fact that they're going to chop these trees down, when that's been very publicly made note of, and the fact is that they already, the Obama Foundation and the Chicago Park District already went in and chopped down about 40 trees without even going to court and asking for permission from the court. So, I mean, the tree issue is pretty clear. And then they also claim that, you know, that I have no right to make any statement about what Hyde Parkers think, because I don't live there. Well, I have to say, I live in Wilmette as it happens, and I hardly know what everybody in Wilmette thinks. I mean, it's kind of amazing that people can think that they know what everybody thinks who happens to live in a town with a certain name on it. But I hope you will write a letter to the editor. And as far as the Sun-Times, I actually went to the length of calling them on the phone and speaking to someone and saying that I really think you should publish my letters, because it isn't right to have only the viewpoint of your editorial board showing on, you know, in the letters to the editor. But they have control over that. Now, as far as the reader goes, they've written some excellent letters. Miss Isaacs, not letters, pieces. She's written some very good pieces about the whole situation. I really never thought of writing a letter to the editor, to the reader, to tell you the truth.
Right.
But I think if the reader just continues the rather, I consider it fair and balanced presentations that they're doing, I think that is a great thing. But I think you have a great opportunity here as a lawyer and living in Hyde Park to really affect some of the thinking on this and make your voice really heard.
Thank you.
I hope you do.
I will, and I'm going to donate to your organization as well.
Oh, well, yeah, that's okay. Oh, by the way, I'm not really a member of POP. I happen to be, I'm an individual who decided to file a lawsuit, and I contacted my friend Herb Kaplan, and he is the president of POP, and I'm not a member, quote, a member of POP. I don't know how anyone can be a member of it because it doesn't have membership, really. But we chose the POP to be the plaintiff, as I say, rather than, let's say, me, because there's more credibility, let us say, to an organization, and everyone can say POP does this and does that or whatever.
Right.
But, you know, so I'm not soliciting contributions, but I'm really soliciting expressions of opinion that can be heard. And, and another thing that I did, which is I happened to be involved with Audubon, and I went to a dinner, and one of the representatives of Congressman Quigley's office was there, and he's trying to get a law passed to make federal buildings bird safe, because he's a big birder, as am I, so I totally agree with that. So then I went up to them and I said to them, well, why don't you do something and speak to the Obama Foundation about the fact that they're going to chop down a lot of habitat in a migrating bird flyway. And so anyway, and then I asked them if they would also contact Lightfoot and tell her, because they are in, you know, the Democratic Party, and it would be a way to contact them. So,
Yeah, just 30 seconds. Yeah, the common thread that I'm picking up here is the extreme condescension of the Obama Foundation and the Obama presidency. The theory, it's a form actually of disaster capitalism, that the South Side is so prostrate economically that they cannot say no to anything, to literally anything. And so the savior comes in who will privatize the commons and therefore, you know, rescue everyone. And because these people are poor, what can they do but applaud?
So, just want to say that the only reason I am here is because I am following Chandler. We live in the same city in Wilmington. And I must say two things you may not know, a lot of things about
Could you get
Chandler.
closer to the mic?
She wrote the book about the prairie, the Midwest prairie. First of all, that's my very impressive book. So for an attorney to write something like that is unbelievable. The second thing is that not only wrote the book, but she built a prairie in Wilmette, in a place that was basically a dumping place for trash and for nothing. She built it. So she built the book and the prairie itself. Now, what I was thinking during this, first of all, I was thinking that this library would be a very role model for Trump's library. You know, it would be probably bigger and better than the one from Trump. Now, the other questions I have, because I must say I am a little embarrassed that I never been to Jackson Park. I didn't even know exactly what Jackson Park is. So let me ask you something. Why is Jackson Park a landmark?
Well, for one thing, it's part of the, you know about the boulevard system, the park and boulevard system?
I've been to the University of Chicago.
Right,
but
right.
Never.
Well, it's a, you know, critical part of the boulevard system on the south side. It was designed, although they didn't carry out every detail of the design, it was designed by Olmsted, who also designed Central Park in New York and every other important park in the United States, basically. And it's, you know, it's in this huge prairie city of ours that has no particular form or shape or contour. Jackson Park is one of the things that shapes the lakefront. It's one of the things that gives form to a formless place.
It's in Studs Lonigan. What's his name wrote about it?
James T. Farrell.
James T. Farrell.
James T. Farrell, it takes a central place in James T. Farrell's book, which is a book about Chicago.
And it's where the 1893 World's Fair took place.
Sounds like a good reason to be
Thank you
a
so
landmark.
much.
Now, this came handy for the questions. Sorry about that. So the other question I have is, you said that it's a library of nothing. So what does it contain then? There must be something inside the
Good
building.
There will be bathrooms. There will be bathrooms. I know that. There will be desks.
I'll tell you what it's going to, I mean, I only know what it's going to contain by what Mr. Obama said it was going to contain in articles in the newspaper, because everything from his administration, all the papers, documents, volumes of gifts from foreign dignitaries, which probably fill many, many rooms, all belong to the federal government and will not be in this because it's not going to be a presidential library. It will contain, he said, Michelle's dresses.
Yay.
And some of his political campaign material. And they'll try, I'm sure they will try and probably succeed in borrowing maybe some artifacts from the federal government, but it will not be part of what's included in the you know, the center. So basically, it's going to have very little. I mean, it's an enormous facility to hold very little. A few dresses and some campaign buttons and other material.
A friend of mine thinks it's going to be Obama's and Michelle's mausoleum. That's the only explanation for this structure. I think what's really going on psychologically, I don't know. I mean, everything is speculation. If you look at the material of the Obama Foundation, it says nothing at all. There's no purpose to this organization other than to raise money for itself. And and a mountain of platitudes.
Okay.
But I think what it is going to be, it will have meeting rooms, it will be places where Obama can rub elbows with other celebrities, and thus, raise his own profile.
Oh yeah, there's other couple things that'll be in there. There's going to be a state-of-the-art kitchen where Mrs. Obama can have her surrogates teach, quote, healthy food, which will be offset by the fact that the giant plaza that's being built is being specially designed to host fast food trucks. And it will also have a recording studio, it is said, so that rock musicians or whatever can come and record, their music there. It's going to have a branch of the Chicago Public Library, even though there already is a branch of it, apparently in a fabulous location in Hyde Park. I guess you can't have too many silk blouses and branches of public libraries, but.
Okay. I have been told that, right. One more question. So one thing I would propose to have in that library is the medals for the Nobel Prize for pacifism. That's one thing that should be there.
What was that?
The medal. He won the Nobel Prize, for
Nobel
yeah, for
Prize.
human
Peace
rights.
Prize. Peace Prize.
The Nobel
Peace
Prize.
Yeah, that should be there. Now, the other question, finally. We're talking about the black neighborhood scene. So how come I don't see any African American in this order? Is there a reason that that's a community? Thank you.
It would be nice, obviously, if this were, I think we probably should be doing this presentation on the South Side. That's a good thought.
Yeah, your point is well taken. I just want to say, I'm going to go back to where I began with all of this. First of all, Woodlawn. The Woodlawn organization. Is there any manifestation in the black community in Chicago in opposition to this abomination? I'm thinking to myself, and I'm speaking from a historical standpoint here, this president was probably responsible. I think the amount of black wealth that was lost in the last 10 years, 12 years, how far back he went. It coincided with, of course, what happened with the meltdown and all of the homeowners that lost their homes, which was a substantial number of people. We know the population, you had brought that up, Hugh, at one point in the discussion about the black population in the city of Chicago is like heading towards half of what it was. Does anyone know of is there anybody that's brought any of this up? We're looking at this guy who's been almost deified in a community that he's half destroyed. Quite honestly, that's the reality I think we're confronted with here. And with regards to that too, I'm just thinking about after he became president, now that I'm not getting a little far afoot here from Woodlawn or Hyde Park or the South Side, but look at the American military and in Africa specifically. Who brought that to bear? We're talking about, we got involved in an area where, as far as the United States goes, militarily speaking, again, a lot of people dying. Who owns that? Who's responsible for that?
Well, I think my response would be to you is that I'm not interested in belittling Mr. Obama. Whether I like him or not is really not relevant. I'm really interested in saying that a public park should not be used for private development. And I don't care whether I love the president or I hate the president. It's a principle that I believe in. And I hope that the judge finds that the law supports my view, because if you have your view about President Obama, other people feel 100% differently about him, and we can't use those kinds of emotional or, let's say, sociological or historical or whatever kind of reasons one has for having a certain viewpoint as a basis for how we live in our society.
Yeah, I would.
Well, I mean, yeah, we are kind of factually challenged. You know, to add one point.
I don't think, it's not factually, it's not, so, the people voted for President Obama to be president. He was the first black president. He lived in Chicago. His wife is born and raised in Chicago. She wants the Obama Center to be in Chicago. He feels the same way. He has a right to have an Obama Center. He had a right to have an Obama Presidential Library, but he chose to throw that away. The question is, where can he put it? I think he cannot put it in a public park. But anywhere else he wants to put it, where it's legal, I don't care whether he does or not. It's up to him to do, and more power to him. So as far as whether you like him or you don't like him, I think is irrelevant.
No, it doesn't matter what I think about him. I think what's most important here is what the community that is most affected by this, which would be Woodlawn, you know.
South Shore.
South Shore, is there any opposition at all there?
Yeah,
Any
there's a
kind of
little
organized opposition at all there towards this? That's the
No,
question
well,
I
first of all,
have.
I disagree with you that the community should make the decision. This is a state issue. It's also a federal issue because of the federal implications such as Lakeshore Drive and so forth. And I don't think the people who live next door are the only people who have a voice in this, but that maybe that's an aside. As far as there being opposition, there is some. You can watch something that is on the web, which was arranged by one of the professors who originated the letter to the public about their opposition to having the Obama Center in Jackson Park. He had what did he call it, a symposium. It was sometime last year, and it was, it's on the web. You can listen to all kinds of people making their viewpoints heard. And there were some black leaders who were very concerned about the gentrification and the fear that people would be losing their homes. And one of the black leaders spoke to the point that Hugh mentioned, that Obama himself knows about the gentrification, but told everyone to not worry because it won't happen until his daughter has children. So I mean, it was kind of a, you know, sort of an acknowledgement of he knows that this is a problem. But the black leaders in Hyde Park and in that area, in my opinion, are unwilling to stand up to their fears and face the Obama mystique or whatever it is. I mean, and so that it's like a religion, and people are afraid to publicly oppose it. And it's my personal viewpoint of what's going on there. I don't see any person who's black being willing to lead any opposition to the Obama Center.
I have gotten some comments when my essay came out in Counterpunch. Some people who live in the neighborhood, African Americans, who said, "Oh, this is really destructive, and we have to do something about it." And then I never heard from them again. I don't know. It never hit critical mass. But my own sense is, you know, it's what I said in my presentation. You put your finger on it. This is emblematic. The Obama Presidential Center is emblematic of his role in American politics, which is that, you know, he's foisting this fraudulent, this destructive thing on the community, and expecting to, I don't know, get applause for it, basically, and no one is really willing to see through that, actually, or very, very few anyway.
Well, I think ultimately, if this is going to be stopped, that's where it's going to have to come from. It won't be a court decision, because if the people themselves are not willing to fight, there's no judge that's going to do it for them. I mean, that's just the way the American system operates. But I'll leave that at that. But if you got another question?
I just wanted to clarify my position on the precedent that would be established by the construction of the Obama Community Center or Center. When I referred to Donald Trump, I didn't mean that he would build something in Chicago. He already has. But can you imagine Central Park with the biggest edifice in the world?
Biggest phallic symbol.
Well, the point is, it's up up to the, this judge rules in this case may have some bearing on that, but not everybody, not every state or jurisdiction follows the same, they don't all follow the same law, like the public trust. A lawyer wrote in, this has gotten some attention, like a woman in Florida contacted me because she lives on a golf course or something there that the government had said would be preserved, and then it turned out they're not going to preserve it, they're building, I don't know, whatever in it, and so then a lawyer from some other community who was somehow got into this conversation from Texas said that they don't have the public trust doctrine there because he was involved in things. I mean, their law it depends on the law in different jurisdictions. So as far as Central Park, it will probably depend on the laws in New York and whether or not the New Yorkers are willing to have important, rich public figures build their private centers in their public parks. It's up to the different communities to make those decisions.
But I do think that if this monstrosity does happen, the precedent is made that there won't be a legitimate presidential library again, ever. I mean, the point of all of these restrictions is like any regulation, like any restriction. It's to contain egotism. It's to contain it's to contain this sort of selfishness and greed. And so it produces, so there are limits within the National Archives. Once those limits are ignored, they'll never be reinstated.
You're absolutely right, and one of the funny things is that when you read the law that established or furthered the archives, one of the senators on the floor said that they wanted, in 1980, that they were passing these new regulations because they wanted to avoid, and this was long before there was an Obama even probably, in anybody's twinkling eye. I mean, they wanted to avoid the possibility of more pyramids, that's the word they use, pyramids being built in honor of the president's glorious views of themselves. And it's kind of funny because the Obama Center, it's not exactly a pyramid, but it has similarities.
Any concluding remarks?
Well, thank you all for listening, and
Yes, I'm impressed at your strength of character to sit here and listen to this all
on this beautiful day coming inside here.
Thank you.